Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Riv, developer from RH Studios, currently working on Pepper Grinder. Hi, Riv, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's good to be on the podcast.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're doing great, and huge thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Um, Now, seeing as we're recording right in the new year, hopefully you had a good holidays or New Year or what have you, as I like gesture the whole circle in my hand.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a quiet one and I didn't do any work, so that was great.
Yeah, it's always great when you can actually relax. I'm, myself, I managed to take enough time off to not have to go back until this Thursday, so I'm very much enjoying the not doing a thing as well. So, Rib,
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
oh, no worries. Yeah, I was just gonna say it can be difficult to allow yourself to do that. So, yeah, always good to always good to make that happen somehow.
Yeah, and I've heard that from a handful of people, like when you're kind of like a small team or an indie, a solo dev or what have you, the pressure is, it's not really like external pressure, I guess, or sometimes it is, but it's usually like you driving yourself to always be working and learning how to actually like clock off or turn off or whatever. That's always great. So I'm glad that you have seemingly figured that out and was actually able to, relax over the
Yeah.
time off, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
So, Riv, before we get started, if you don't mind, would you mind just, telling me and anyone who's listening a little bit about yourself, just so we have an idea of who you are?
Yeah. Uh so yeah, I guess I'm uh generalist game developer. I largely make games by myself, uh, except for the hard stuff like porting and doing music, both of which I don't know how to do. So I have friends working on that stuff with me. Um, yeah, otherwise I'm a solo game developer uh, with a background in art and uh, specifically illustration and animation. Uh, and yeah, I've been actively making or at least trying to make video games for about 10 years now.
Well, that's cool to hear. 10 years is a fair amount of time, and hopefully in that time you've had at least had some fun learning, doing it, not hopefully not a whole lot of too hard lessons that you had to learn the hard way. Wow, I really bumbled that one up. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think I'd be able to stick with it this long if it wasn't fun. Uh, Definitely some hard lessons in there, but yeah, I mean, fun is what drives the entire thing, at least for me.
And that's great to hear that you're enjoying it because looking at Pepper Grinder, the game you're working on now, the thing that drew me to it was, and forgive me because you might be able to say where this came from because it's, but you might not because it's my brain. But the thing that drew me to it is the drilling concept, like the going through the dirt and everything. That just looks like a whole lot of fun. And I don't know why, I don't know where it's coming from, where it's reminding me. But yeah, that looks like a whole lot of fun, and I'm, glad you're having fun, doing what you're doing, and seemingly making stuff that looks like it as well will be fun, if that makes sense. Because again, I bumbled that all up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it was plenty clear enough for me, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that drives Tapper Grinder is just the joy of movement. Uh, it's something that I've always really enjoyed in 2D platformers specifically. 'Cause I'm uh, not super big technical platforming. Um, I like stuff that has more of a flow state. Uh, so yeah, like when I was prototyping it, uh, I was just kind of feeling nostalgic about Echo the Dolphin, uh, which a lot of people think is a weird inspiration for this, but like the initial prototype was pretty much just Echo the Dolphin plus Dig Dug. Um, Probably at least someone influenced by a specific early shot in I think the first episode of Gurren Lagann, uh, the anime, where you have like a cutaway side view of someone using a small hand drill to tunnel through. It's just kind of all these weird ingredients in the soup. I don't know exactly how they all came together, but yeah, somehow just that and this desire to capture the joy of movement and just like figure out uh how can I make the most basic thing you do in this game be like the most fun thing in it too. Um and just kind of extrapolating that in every direction I could think of.
So thank you for that. And like right after I asked that, I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, it's probably going to be Echo. Like that in my head, I was like, it's
Oh,
probably Echo.
really?
And I'm like, oh crap, I answered my own question without even asking. But I'm happy that that is it because it literally just connected the whole when you said flow state, the whole like with Echo, well, as you know, and anyone who has played Echo will know, just the fluid movement of it and how it's more or less, um, I want to say perfect in terms of what you would expect it to work as, um, which to some people might not make any sense. And I guess it's kind of hard to like explain, but like when you look at a dolphin and you go, oh yeah, that's how a dolphin should move on like a 2D setup, Echo just works the way you would expect it to. You would think it would just how you look at it, right?
Absolutely.
Um, but I'm happy to hear all of those connections because now it all makes perfect sense to me as well. The Dig Dug one I wasn't expecting because I'm not going to lie, the last Dig Dug I played was actually Dig Dug 2, which is not Dig Dug at all for anyone
Right.
who's played it. Um, but the Gurren Lagann reference, that like you said, it kind of all goes into the soup, and that does it. Like that. Thank you. I understand completely where you came from now for it, and it all in my brain is now like all the dots are connected, and it's perfect for how and why everything looks so fun. Like it's just everything there. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad that clicks for someone other than me.
Um, and I'm not gonna lie, I think a lot of people will be lost on Dig Dug, but only because
Yeah.
um I don't I don't know many people that have played Dig Dug in their life. Um,
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people are aware of it. Like it turns up on like t-shirts and stuff still, but I don't know many people that have actually played it.
yeah, like the only reason I've played it is because my father saw they made it on the Game Boy, um, and for whatever reason, in his wisdom, decided since he liked playing it at the arcades when when it came out when he was younger, um, that he went, well, my son will like this, and gave me a copy of Dig Dug. I'm not gonna lie, that was not a very um grabbing game for a 5-year-old, but I know what
Sure.
Dig Dug is, and I'm sure many other people don't. So
Yeah.
it's a weird thing to say. Kind of like you said, people are aware of it in the existence of everything, but probably have never actually touched it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can assure you, on the Atari where I played it, it's not much better than the Game Boy version. Uh, it's still a neat idea, very clunkily executed. Uh, and gameplay wise, there isn't really any of that in Pepper Grinder, but just it's basically just the idea of digging through dirt, uh, and then all the rest is echo.
Um, yeah, like I said as well, like it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, and that's one of the main, like that's one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you because just looks like it's going to be fun. So, um, I don't know where I'm going with that. Sorry.
Well, dear, regardless, I hope it is fun.
Uh, so Riv, if you don't mind, because you said you've been doing this for about 10 years, working on games in some fashion. Would you mind maybe elaborating or saying like how you got into developing and making games?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I say actively, specifically actively making games, uh, for the last 10 years. It's something I've always wanted to do. Um, maybe not as far back as I can remember, but at least since I was like 6 or 7 years old. Uh, I remember playing, let's see, Donkey Kong Country 1, the first one, Super Nintendo with my dad, and I think we were playing the co-op where each controller is one of the apes, and if one of you dies or if you trade off, the other person gets to play, that kind of thing. Uh, so we're just playing and trading off, and this was a couple years before we'd seen anything like Mario 64 or any 3D games, and my dad just remarked that he'd like to explore the stuff in the backgrounds of the levels, uh, just like what's over in that piece of jungle that we see way over there. Uh, and of course, it's just a tiled background texture, uh, and it's really nothing. But it got me thinking about how you would do something like that from the perspective of a kid who's really only played 2D games. Uh, like I was basically just imagining, like, oh, maybe you get fired out of a barrel into the background, and then you're way over there all of a sudden. Uh, but that kind of planted a seed, I think, um, of just thinking about games more critically and what they could be in the future. Um, things like that. Uh, I think that pretty quickly turned into wanting to make my own games somehow, but kind of feeling in the back of my head like that was out of reach. Uh, and I think pretty much stayed like that until it's probably like late middle school or early junior high age, uh, when a friend of mine introduced me to the PlayStation 1 version that I think From Software weirdly put out of RPG Maker, uh, which was like a really rudimentary version of what you might expect from RPG Maker if you're familiar with it now. Uh, and like the only way you could share anything you made was to save it out to a memory card and then give that to someone else who also had RPG Maker. So the quite limited in multiple respects, but uh, yeah, I quickly got, or as quickly as I could, having to save up allowance, got my own copy of that, and I don't think I was even aware of the PC version, which was probably already free at that point, but I didn't know. Um, so I got a hold of that, and I started experimenting with that, and I think I tried to demake Jet Set Radio into like uh, I tried to force it to kind of an action game format by just having um, wall tiles that you could interact with. that would just kind of turn into uh, some Jet Set Radio style graffiti when you press the button. It was really simple and not fun. But uh, yeah, I was just kind of uh, bashing my head against it, trying to make it do things that it really wasn't made to do. Um, and yeah, I think that was the first thing that made making games feel more like an attainable thing. Uh, but that, it prompted me to do more research into what it would take to get going with a real game engine. Um, and I tried out a few things that were available for free at the time. Um, like one of them was engine called Reality Factory that was, I think it was like a heavily modified Quake engine or something. Uh, so I got some 3D stuff going in that, but kept running into issues. It was really clunky even for the time, uh, and it was really difficult to actually get something even approaching a basic demo going with it. Um, but just kind of tinkering with things and running into barriers with scripting and programming because I really have no aptitude for that kind of thinking, I think. Uh, and the more I looked at like the current professional engines at the time, um, this was mostly before Unity, uh, and I think a little before GameMaker even. 'Cause this is when I was like 14, 15. I'm 34 now. Um, and yeah, just running more and more into programming as a barrier for me. Um, or at least it felt like one. Because I've always been bad at math. Uh, and yeah, the way that programming is presented a lot of the time, especially in media, so you wind up believing it from a young age, is that it's really heavy on math. Um, and just being able to type really fast, like in hackers, and things just happen magically somehow. Um, so yeah, it felt like something I couldn't do for a long time. So I started shifting more towards like 3D animation or something. Like here's something uh, games related that might be able to get me in a position to help make a game. Uh, that kind of thing. Um, and so that was my focus all through uh, high school and college, and yeah, I think maybe halfway through college, I stumbled across um, just more and more new approaches to programming, like visual scripting. Um, so I started looking into that stuff, uh, and eventually ran into Construct 2, which is pretty much entirely event-based visual scripting, meaning that like uh, say you want to make like a background prop, like a piece of grass or something, right? You just in Construct 2, you just say, okay, I want to create a new object, and I want that object to be a sprite, and it's just a series of selections you're making from uh, everything that it's possible to do with this type of object. Uh, and they're all just kind of listed there for you uh, to pick it out. Um, so you pick your sprite and you give it an image so that it actually looks like something. It isn't just a transparent space. Uh, and then you can place it in your level, and there it is. Great. And now you want it to do something, so it's not just a static thing. So like easy way to bring life to a piece of grass or a plant or whatever is to just make it wave back and forth a little bit, like it's blowing in the breeze, right? Uh, so you just add a sine wave behavior under construct 2. They have all these different behaviors you can assign to objects, and the sine wave can just be a value, so you can use it for whatever, and it'll just do its thing with its value going up and down, uh, like a sine wave does. Or you can set it to set the angle of the object. So you do that and tell it how far you want it to go, and now it's waving back and forth, and it's all just really intuitive the way it's presented, um, and it's not just a wall of text that makes my eyes slide out of focus. So it's wow, this is something that I can actually parse. Um, and if you break it down, it's not any different from uh, quote unquote real scripting. You know, it's do all the exact same things. It's just presented in a different way, um, and that kind of blew my mind at the time because all of a sudden I could make an entire game top to bottom, um, and it was just a matter of the tools being right for me, um, and yeah, from there on out, I was kind of just been cruising. Like it turned out I did have an aptitude for these things all along. Um, I just needed the right stepping stone. Uh, and Construct 2 wound up being it. And that's what Pepper Grinder is being developed in still. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the weird, kind of dumb game dev odyssey I went on.
So, that's really interesting because, um, like I didn't know about Construct too. I'm my day job is a developer, but it's not, it's boring development work. I can relate to what you said, in the early days of going, oh, this is, it's all math based and wanting to avoid it. And I like the path I went down was, we learned Visual Basic and forms and all of that nonsense. So like less focus on the wall of text, so to say. And now I rarely have to worry about math. So yeah, like I felt like I was lied to in a like I don't know if you're using the exact same words, but I imagine it's like a similar feeling that the what you were led to believe programming would be versus what it really is. I felt like I was lied to in that, now I'm like, well, I don't do anything with math. I'm sure there's a lot of people
Yeah,
that do. And those people are probably really upset to hear that. Um, Actually, I shouldn't say upset, but those people might be looking at everyone that doesn't do math and go, well, you don't know what you're not doing the same kind of stuff. You don't get
yeah,
to have the joy of writing huge mathematical equations to do like water effects or something. And nothing against those people. I have
yeah,
the utmost respect for whatever amount of genius is needed to do that. I'm just never going to be having to do that, and I'm thankful for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you are kind of lied to. Like if you're like talking to your counselor in college or something and being like, I wanna make video games. What classes should I take to get there? And they'll sign you up for like all the algebra and everything. And like in my day to day, I use a little bit of basic math, a little bit of geometry, and I don't think I've touched algebra in 15 years.
So, Riv, based on, the experiences that you've had, is there any like words of wisdom you could share for those that might want to follow in your footsteps, so to say?
Um, yeah, I guess, based on uh how I wound up getting into it, just keep trying things. If you find barriers, uh, see if you can find tools to address that. If they don't feel like something you can reasonably overcome. Uh, yeah, keep looking for new tools, new approaches. Um, it usually pays off. Like even like my trying to make the PlayStation RPG Maker do stuff that it wasn't supposed to do. I found value in that, just for learning how to problem solve and work within constraints. Um, it's like I feel like it's a common thing you hear from game developers that constraints uh, encourage creativity, um, and a lot of really neat ideas are born from working within constraints. Uh, but that's definitely been true for me. Um, yeah, that and just start making stuff any way you can. It's another common piece of advice, but it's really an important one, I think.
So yeah, thank you for that, because that is important advice. I think to like have to. Sorry, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase it. Like I don't think people often say like if you hit a wall, just look for new tools or what have you. Obviously, like the some of the advice given, and I'm guilty of this, is if someone's like, "Oh, I have a problem," it's like, well, just keep exploring it, but telling them, being a little more explicit on what exploring it looks like can make a world of difference. In if you hit a wall like with what you were trying to do with the RPG maker, if someone had just said to you, or like if that wall, if you couldn't figure out how to do the graffiti kind of system, if someone just said, well, keep exploring, well, that doesn't really answer it. But if someone said, well, maybe make interactable objects against the background or what have you, that does it. Like that leads you to a whole different way to approach it. And I think that's fantastic advice to give, just because like I said, and like I said as well, I'm guilty of it. You don't often think that explicit things, as weird as it is, explicit things that might help you in the right direction, as simple as it might be in your own head to think, sometimes just doesn't click when you're in the thick of trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be easy to fall in a rut and just keep bashing your head against the same thing the same way, until you can find a way to get it work, just assuming you're doing something wrong. But sometimes it can't work the way you're trying to do it, so you have to uh, dig yourself out of that rut somehow and look at it from a totally different angle.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you. You summarized it a little better than um actually I should say far better than I was able to. For what you got what I was trying to say, and you wrapped it up much nicer. So thank you. So, I believe you answered this already. So I forgive me if this hasn't already been answered. However, you talked about playing Donkey Kong Country with your dad and wanting to explore like the background or thinking of how that would work interacting with the background. Is it fair to say that the game that changed your view from games just being like a thing you sit down and enjoy and play to being the thing you wanted to do was Donkey Kong Country, or was there something else in there that, we could speak to?
I think that's probably fair, unless you consider that specific version of RPG Maker a game. Uh, that was how I thought of it. Um, like little kid logic, uh, not being able to separate it being on a game console from it being uh, uh, a tool or just a generic piece of software for making things, Um, but yeah, ultimately it probably was Donkey Kong Country.
Now, I I agree with what you were saying for RPG Maker because like uh that's that's a weird thing for I think a child to wrap their head around that it was like a tool, right? Like a develop or like a platform to present things, I guess, and not
Yeah,
actually a game. Um, and like you had mentioned that like the only way to actually like have your friends try your game was to like load it onto a memory card and then they had to have the game as well and you had to give it to them and
yeah,
like to like unpacking it all and that. It was at that time as well, I believe it was very similar on PC. Only because I around that age as well experimented with RPG Maker. Now, mind you, I might have been using an old version or what have you, um, just because I was 14 and, how else do you get these things when you're that age, when
yeah,
it comes to PC? Um, but like it perplexed me, or not perplexed, that's not the right word, I don't think, but it confused me a lot because I had like maybe the same idea as you, like, oh, I'll make this little game and I'll see what I can do, and then it comes time to like try it or like give it to someone, and like the person's like, okay, you just sent me this like weird file name, like what am I supposed to do with it? And you're like, oh well, put it into RPG Maker. I don't know, like you figure it out. I did my part, now it's your turn. So
yeah,
like I can easily understand like being younger and like trying to figure that out and in your head like this is a game, right? Right? No?
yeah.
Oh, okay. Um
Yeah, I even remember describing it to friends as like it's a game that lets you make games and like trying to convey how mind-blowing that was to me. And then just kind of being like, yeah, whatever. But
but it's also good to know here that like Donkey Kong Country was kind of the game, if we'll separate it into like the categories there,
yeah,
but that it was the game that got you into wanting to make games or what have you. Um, because that was like Donkey Kong Country was a fantastic game. It did a lot of cool things, and being able to influence that is is great just because Rare as themselves have always did cool things across several different games. So just having that as like the foundation to kind of make you interested. uh I don't think there's not many other games that could have came from like a studio that really leaned into like the creativity or the imagination of certain things. I'm speaking like across their whole catalog there. I know that Donkey Kong Country, the first one, was, and I don't mean this in any ill way when I say it, but it was not as wild and crazy as like everything that came after it, but still
yeah,
like them, I just think that's like a great jumping point because if you like the first one, you'd probably look at the rest of the stuff they did, or you'd be inclined to, and um, it probably wouldn't hurt to have the rest of their catalog feeding into your brain when you're already receptive to what they're giving you. If that makes any sense, I'm sorry.
yeah, absolutely.
So, Riv, if you don't mind speaking to this, and this is kind of like, I don't know, I think it's kind of a hard question to properly sum up, or like actually put into words. But what is it that makes gaming enjoyable to you?
That is kind of a tricky one. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think for me, it's um, engaging with interesting systems uh, that get me thinking. Um, but for me, it has to be in like an active, fun way. Um, so I'm not really big on like entirely systems driven stuff. Um, like I've never been able to wrap my head around Dwarf Fortress, for example. Uh, even the latest Steam version uh, that makes it more accessible than ever, I still just there's something there that isn't clicking for me, um, and it's probably just how hands off how much of it is. Um, but yeah, I'm really fascinated by the sort of weird interlocking Rube Goldberg machines that video games can be. Um, so whether it's something like the combat system in Devil May Cry 5, um, and how all of these very specific moves with specific purposes can be interlinked, um, to fights in like completely different ways with an identical move set. Uh, just what order you string them together in makes such a difference in how things play out. It's really interesting to me. Um, or even something like Valheim, that's a lot more sedate and just about gathering resources and building stuff. Um, uh, yeah, it's the way the systems interact with each other, and like the emergent behaviors that can come from that. Um, like even just if interacting with an enemy can surprise me somehow, um, that's gonna get me. And that's a big part of what makes making games interesting to me too, um, is being able to set up a system myself and know everything about it in and out and still possibly be surprised by something that happens in that system. Uh, yeah, it's the appeal of having a little functional world with uh, rules that are clear or not, but still rules that you can rely on to uh, make manipulating things and getting interesting reactions possible. Um, so I guess that's a really waffly way to just say that I like sandboxes, um, but I feel like that kind of pigeonholes it. Like if I say I like sandbox games, that doesn't like that would exclude my Devil May Cry example for a lot of people. Um, but like I feel like that's a combat sandbox really because it has that possibility space that I'm looking for. Uh, but yeah, I think that's the most not nonsense way I can put what draws me to games.
So so thank you for that. And like forgive me, I think what like the best way to summarize it is like the complexity of everything, how it all works together. Like that's what I understood what you were saying as. And um, I personally as well, I also like watching sometimes like the nonsense of certain scenarios unfold when all of the systems are kind of like crashing against each other. Uh,
Yeah.
in like when you were explaining this, I was just thinking of something that happened in Saints Row 3 with me and a friend when we played co-op. And I was driving a car and we had just finished running from the cops, right? We were doing whatever dumb stuff in Saints Row 3. And we're running from the cops and as far as I know, the cops aren't chasing us anymore, but he keeps shooting out the back of the car, yelling they're chasing us, they're whatever. And I was incredibly confused. And I'm like, well, whatever. I'm just gonna go to the airport. If we're being chased by stuff, like I thought maybe my game glitched and I wasn't seeing like the army of cops or whatever behind us. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
well, screw it, whatever. We'll go to the airport. That's where we're going anywhere, and we'll deal with it there. And we pull into the airport, and I stop, and I'm like, well, where is all these? Like, where is everything? And he goes, oh, she's coming. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? And up rolls this little old lady in like, a Cutlass sedan kind of looking, or a Saber, or whatever they're called. But like a 1980s like sedan, that kind of boxy nonsense rolls up. And I'm like, what? Like, I thought the police were after. Like, no, no, you cut this person off and bumped them, and she's been mad at us. I've been trying to shoot her the whole time. And I'm like, dude, it's an old lady. Like, what are. So we stop and we wait. I'm like, we're just going to see what happens. And we're sitting in the car. She comes, she pulls up, opens the car door, pulls him out of the car, stomps on his face a little, runs over to the other side, pulls me out of mine, and stomps on my face a little, and then goes to get back into her car to drive away. Obviously, we didn't let that happen. That's not how that flies. But
Of course
the nonsensical nature of all of those systems banging against each other, like all of that complex stuff of all of this spawning because I accidentally dinged her car while we were running from the police. I
not. Yeah.
love when all of those systems, like all of those complex like ones and zeros fire off, and you are now in a position where a literal little old lady gets out of her car and then, curb stomps you because you cut her off in traffic. Um, so yeah, so
Yeah.
I agree, and
Yes.
I love that. I love that as well in games.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing. Uh, yeah, and it's even necessarily uh just the complexity. It's just um finding the right number of things to account for, like the right number of interactions, and just being like, how many of these simple rules can I just apply to everything in the game so that a certain amount of interaction is all but guaranteed. Like I remember reading an interview with Derek Yu about how Spelunky was put together, and technically every single object in that game uh, has the same set of parameters. Uh, as far as I know, I may be misremembering, but like everything from the breakable tiles to the enemies to the rocks you can pick up and throw and bounce off the wall and hit yourself in the head and potentially die from. Um, they're they're all the same object with different restrictions on them. Like obviously the breakable tiles can't move and don't have any other real logic to them other than if this list of things touches it, they break. Uh, but just having that basic level of interaction between uh, every single object in the game just opens things up so much for things that even Derek never imagined would happen. Uh, and I'm sure there are still things that can happen that uh, he doesn't know about, uh, that has happened to someone somewhere, and maybe eventually that'll filter back to him. Uh, and he'll just get a little smile and be like, "That's neat." because that's what I would do. Uh, but yeah, I'm endlessly fascinated by things like that.
Like, speaking of not speaking directly to Spelunky, but can you imagine making a system where you're like, oh, I'm just gonna throw this rock at the enemy, and you miss, and it bounces off the wall and flies back and just kills you? Like, could you imagine the first time that happens and just discovering such a thing, being like, well, that was fun.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing I imagine all the time. Like that's the kind of things that I hope to just randomly happen. Uh, I don't think that anything I'm doing in Pepper Grinder is quite as robust. Uh, Derek Yu's a really smart guy. Um, so I don't think I've hit that level, but I do I do try to just have some of that in there. Um, and not all of that is even appropriate for Pepper Grinder because uh it's not a roguelike. There's very little randomness in it. Um, I'm actually actively trying to keep it a little bit deterministic, uh, just so that speedrunners don't get too upset with me. Um, but yeah, it's something that's just kind of always running in the back of my head. Like, how can I add some of that flavor somewhere?
And I think a lot of people will appreciate that kind of approach, especially the speedrunners, um, or anyone who's trying to like nail down the technicalities of things. Only because, and I think it was just recently. I don't remember the game. I think it was earlier today or yesterday, but I saw on Twitter that someone was doing a speed run for something, and they were on like a record pace, and then just a rogue barrel rolled in front of them, and screwed up their entire record run. Um, so like I imagine people will be appreciative of the deterministic nature of some of your choices.
Yeah, yeah, stuff like that uh, doesn't necessarily bother me, but I've seen enough people just have their whole days ruined by it that I'm like, okay, even if I want something to be pretty unpredictable, it doesn't have to be like based on a random number generator. Uh, so like there's a handful of things that react differently based on your position related to them. Um, and I suppose if you experimented long enough, you could figure out how that works. And that's exactly the kind of thing speedrunners tend to do. So hopefully they appreciate that uh, even the stuff that seems random um, can be manipulated somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking to that also as well, like not this obviously isn't based directly from the game you're working on, but I think, I don't think games need to be 100% seeded. And
Yeah.
by that I mean like I think it was Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior, whatever name you want to use for it. But I believe the first one, depending on the amount of steps you took and like the name you
Oh,
used
yeah.
and whatever, it would influence like the end game for how many enemies you would interact with and like what enemy and like how much XP and blah blah blah. Like all of this stuff just determined by how many steps you took in like the first castle with your name and your name choice, and not because of the developers being like, oh, we're going to put something funny in, but just because it was assembler and or whatever Nintendo used. I believe it was assembler, but anyway. But like just the nature of the console and the computes and all of that were just you know nonsensically based around a weird seed count that just influenced so many things that, quite frankly, I don't think anyone should ever have figured out. But, speaking to what you said about like the direction, the things work differently depending on the direction approached or what have you, and, speedrunners define that. Um, if it's in there, if people were able to find that weird seed thing for like Dragon Quest or whatever, I'm fairly confident people will find what you're doing for directional reactions.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a weird one. That's like I can only assume they did that just to have like one less variable to track. Because they were running on such an economy for things like that back then. Um, but yeah, it's so baffling even with that context.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, so Riv, another question for you before I, let you go or what have you. Outside of games, what other hobbies do you have and do you enjoy? And I full well ask this knowing that it really could just be games, and that's perfectly fine as well.
Sure. Yeah, well, it's not just games. Uh, I'm a big Lego nerd. Uh, I have kind of a ridiculous, unmanageable collection of Legos. Uh, yeah, I like building uh, mecha and stuff. Um, and you know, I do Gundam models and stuff too. Um, but my partner's really into Gundam, so we'll do that together. But the Lego stuff is mostly just me. So I have like big, organized, sectioned off bins with like all the smallest, fiddliest, weird little connectors I can find uh, to um, kind of meet this ongoing challenge I have to myself of making like the smallest mecha and robots and things like that that I can, with the restriction of it being Lego and everything being a certain size. Um, it's kind of an engineering challenge for me. Um, it's like how can I use these parts in ways I haven't thought of before, to get uh, like a certain degree of movement and articulation that I'm comfortable with. Um, basically like high quality action figure level. So I'm using lots of ball joints or um, putting different axles and clips together in different ways to approximate that kind of movement just the smallest way I can. Uh, yeah, that's kind of a wind down thing. Um, uh, that and general model building, and then before the pandemic, I was really into bouldering, like indoor rock climbing at a gym built for that. Um, that's something I'd really like to get back to, but haven't touched in a while. Uh, yeah, other than those, uh, it's pretty much just games. Like I really enjoy cooking too. I think I'm okay at it. Um, but that's also a thing I do to survive, so it's not really a wind down.
Uh, so easy follow-up, I think, in this case then. Quick follow-ups. When it comes to Lego, I'm not well versed in it. However, I'm versed enough to know it exists. So, with that in mind, then, if you were pressed right now, like hard pressed to have to pick like your favorite current or maybe even not current set, we'll call it sets. It's been years, and I think they were called sets. But if you were told, what's your favorite set, or asked, what would your favorite Lego set be?
And that is a tough one. Um, so I do the mecha stuff. That's like mostly what I do with Lego, but I am into like the the normal sets and stuff too. And Lego even does uh, a few mecha. type things. They have like one of their longest running best-selling themes at this point is called Ninjago, and it's like uh, it's like high-tech ninjas kind of thing. Um, but it's fantasy too. They've got ghosts and stuff, I guess. But they have pretty cool mecha that I could use as like a starting point. But I feel like for the most part, any Lego set I get uh, is at most a basis for something that I want to make for myself. Um, so I don't uh, usually stick with the instructions. Um, like I'll build it out according to the instructions once and then take it all apart. And if I like the idea of what that was, I'll rebuild it myself, supplementing even more parts or uh, expanding it in some way. Um, but one of the few sets that I actually did just follow the instructions for, and I'm probably going to keep it that way as a display piece, is just last year they did Bowser in a partnership with Nintendo. Um, and he's enormous and has some like puppetry elements to him. Uh, so like he has like controls built into his shell so that you can make him turn his head and open his jaws. Uh, and if you have him loaded up with the projectile, he'll fire a like little black fireball out of his mouth when he opens his jaws. Um, and it's just really cool to see them getting into uh, this kind of like really polished, well designed um, sort of uh, display piece figure that still has play elements to it. Um, yeah, I don't know if it's my favorite. I feel like that's a really hard thing to pick, but it's definitely occupying my mind a little bit, especially since I have him set up in my office. He's standing on the shelf behind me right now, uh, taking up like half of it. He's huge. He's like 11 inches tall, I think. Um, but yeah, I'm just really fascinated by the engineering that goes into Lego sets, uh, even as far as how the instructions are made. Like there's something they've been doing recently, just in the last few years, where the instructions are like consciously paced so that the experience of building a model has like surprises and weird little reveals and stuff to it. So like you'll be building something for a while and it'll be kind of ambiguous as to what it is or what part of this larger structure it's going to be. And then it'll all fit together with other modules you've put together previously in a surprising way. And you'd be like, holy shit, this not only is this not what I thought I was building, but it's also fit together with these other parts so that it actually has like a neat mechanical thing it can do. Uh, it's just really cool the way they're doing that these days.
And that's really cool. I didn't know about the Bowser, and I did a quick, like what you were explaining, I did a quick image search, and yeah, that's massive. Um,
Yeah,
so that's cool. Good to be aware of as well on my part, just because I'm always kind of into the idea of Lego, but there isn't much of it that would make me want to make that jump, so to say. Um,
Sure.
for the reason that I'm actually going to get into right now, um, because I'm also going to ask this one because you're into Gunpla, Gundam models. Um, do you have a favorite kit from there?
Um, Lately I've been really digging into their 30-minute missions series.
You're ahead of me.
Um, which, yeah, if you aren't aware, 30-minute missions or 30 kits are basically the their new standard for compatibility. Um, so they're previously, like, across all their different scales and everything, that have different size components for like joints and all the little peg holes for the modular parts you could put on. It was kind of all over the place depending on what scale you were building or what grade. Um, and so now, um, starting with 30 and moving forward for all their kits, I think, um, that's how I understood it. They're standardizing the sizes for everything that allows these different parts to plug together. Um, so again, it's difficult to pick a specific kit because I'll be looking at the shelves and being like, okay, I want to use the head from this one and the torso from that one, the arms from this one. It's kind of like I'm sitting there playing Armored Core uh, and building my own custom Gundam from this stuff, um, and just knowing that it's all going to be able to plug together seamlessly. Uh, so yeah, it's pretty cool. Um, I think uh, if I did have to pick a favorite, there's one um, called the Spinadia Fencer type. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Um, but it's uh, like a really stripped down, lightweight, fast looking design uh, that's, I guess, supposed to use energy swords that I just think is really cool looking. So I actually took one of those and um, got a bunch of like huge booster parts from other compatible models and stuck those on the back. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like this is a really, really boring, waffly explanation for anyone that isn't into this stuff. But yeah, I have a lot of fun with that stuff too.
So, well, that's great to hear. And like I said, you were ahead of me because I was going to try and ask about, Lego Gunpla, and then because the way I've pitched 30-minute mission to people that aren't really into it, um, but we're into like Lego, but are also into Gunpla, is that it's kind of like a weird spiritual successor to like Bionics, where um, everything in the 30-minute mission line, minus like a small handful of things, is
Yeah,
globally compatible. So it's like, for people that like Bionics for doing something like that and can't do Bionics anymore, um, these are relatively cheaper little kits. As their name implies, they're about 30 minutes each, and then
yeah,
you can just buy a bunch of extra boosters or other kits and just go absolutely ham if you want and mash everything together. But yeah, it's I'm glad to know that someone else already knows about them. They're not as widely adopted, um, it seems, which is really unfortunate because I absolutely love them, and I kind of go out of my way to try and get at least one um, of every new one that they put out. Um,
yeah, me too.
and I say that right now, full well knowing that I have like three, maybe four altos just floating around. So, um, sometimes more than one. Um,
Yeah, Yeah, I have a whole shelf right next to me. That between me and my partner, we have like probably 15 or 20 unbuilt kits that are just waiting for us to have time.
That
It's
also is the nature of a backlog.
yeah.
Uh, now, Riv, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I want to let you like have a little more time to unwind and enjoy your evening. Um, so if there was, if there's anything else you want to discuss, a cool game, what else you're doing, or something you just feel more people should be aware of, by all means, the floor is yours. Please also tell everyone, please also let everyone know where they can find more information about you, which I'll also include in the episode description.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't. And one of the funny things about starting to make video games is that ever since that became my full-time job, I haven't had time to play any. Uh, but I do try to carve out some time on weekends most of the time. Uh, yeah, mostly it's just been Elden Ring. Uh, but yeah, I feel like everything anyone could say about Elden Ring has already been said. Um, but yeah, it's just another one of those games with really robust systems that I like sinking my teeth into. Um, but yeah, I don't know if there was like something specific you would have wanted me to get into, or I don't know.
Well, that was more, if like a open call for you if you want to make like a call to action or telling people about, your Twitter where they can find you or something like that. That's also what
Yeah,
that was for.
yeah, of course. Yeah, well, yeah, if anyone wants to keep up with Pepper Grinder, um, I'm at RH uh AHR_ECH. That's my company name on Twitter, and the the same on co-host. If anyone wants to find me there. Um, yeah, I try to post regular updates for Screenshot Saturday or things like that. If anybody wants to see the latest snippet of what I'm working on. Uh, uh, Forewarning, it may slow down towards the end of development because there's going to be less I can actually show anybody if I want to keep some surprises back for when the game comes out. But yeah, that's still going to be at least a little worth your time.
Awesome. And thanks for those like the what to include in the description there. So like I will make that easier for everyone so that, your co-host, your Twitter, um, follow through the description and what have you. And yeah, I completely understand, slowing down and wanting some things to be a nice like surprise kind of secret because, I think that's for me that's one of the cool things or enjoyable things in games where you get into a situation where you didn't know something was going to be there and then you get to have a whole bunch of fun with it just because like if you watch certain movie trailers, the movie's spoiled in some of them for you. And,
Yeah,
be walking into a game with an idea of what's there and then getting to experience something that you had no, like you didn't know was going to be there just makes it all the more fun, right? So that makes
absolutely.
sense. And hopefully other people understand that as well and can relate because, if you knew everything that was going to be there, it's I'm trying to think of the right word. It's easier to it's easier to not enjoy it as much?
Yeah, absolutely.
However, other than that though, Riv, if there wasn't anything else, I will, I'll let you get on with your evening and relax a little bit, before the inevitable happens, seeing as it's a little later tonight.
Yeah, Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, thank you, Riv. The pleasure was all mine. I really appreciate you making the time to have this conversation with me. As
Absolutely.
as well, thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast, and a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Road Steep. And if you like this podcast and want to support it and help it grow, please subscribe or follow me on Twitter at Red Tunic Podcast to receive the latest episode and news, and be sure to share with those you think might also enjoy it. Thanks, until next time.